Welcome to On Democracy with FP Wellman. I'm your host, Fred Wellman, right here in your usual suspect places on the On Democracy channel, as well as Midas Touch. I always say up front to be sure, say hi. I am doing a special episode this week with you guys because of the many things going on in the world, but specifically about the Ukraine crisis. I had been trying to get both our guests on. We have two guests today, which makes it special. With President Zelensky visiting D.C. and the turmoil on Capitol Hill about the foreign aid packages for both Ukraine and our friends in Israel, I kind of wanted to focus in on those. And we have a really great package of guests. I mean, it's an incredibly dangerous moment in the world as the war rages on both Ukraine and Gaza. Political turmoil is causing all kinds of questions. And I hadn't revisited the situation in Ukraine, I think, since we had Alex Vindman on the show, frankly. Or Ben Hodges. Ben Hodges was on the show. So with the president, Mr. Zelensky visiting and the Congress going on, I really wanted to reach out. So I got lucky. I got two great guests. And what you'll hear from today is Tim Mak, who is a actual journalist who's been in Ukraine since actually before the invasion. He was with NPR, and now he's with his own organization, The Counteroffensive. And he's got such a wonderful perspective of what life is on the ground for Ukrainians and writing about the larger stories from the view of individual characters, which is really terrific, The Counteroffensive. And then we're going to shift after Tim over to D.C. and got an opportunity I'm really excited about to speak with Deputy National Security Council spokesperson Sean Savett. So to kind of get the bigger picture of what's going on in D.C. and where we face and the danger we face with this MAGA House Republicans and the Senate Republicans who are resisting aiding our allies and what that means to the United States. So really kind of a cool show. I hope you'll enjoy it. It's not our usual laughing. We're not going to do a ton of laughing because these are very serious issues. I mean, the death and the violence going on in Ukraine is very serious. The political game that's being played is also very serious. But I think you're going to find this an incredibly educational show, and you'll walk away with armed with the information you need to have these conversations with your fellow Americans about what is the danger of not supporting our allies and what is the danger from the Republicans in their manipulations of our foreign aid to others and using the border crisis as a tool to end that aid. So without further ado, let's get on to the music and get on to the show. Welcome back. This is On Democracy FP Wellman. Man, it's so great to have you. I told you we have a special show this week focusing on Ukraine. The timing couldn't be better. Mr. Zelensky is in D.C. as we're recording this show, and I've been wanting to talk to our first guest for a while now, Tim Mak, and I go way back. Tim, of course, just as an overview interview, welcome to the show, has been on the ground almost continuously since before the invasion began in Ukraine. He's traveled the country extensively with NPR and now with his own website and Substack called The Counteroffensive. He's a former investigative correspondent, as I mentioned. We go way back to, I think we said 2012 or so when you were with Politico. We were doing defense stuff, Tim. And of course, most importantly for me as a fellow veteran, you are a former U.S. Army combat medic. Man, Tim, it's so great to connect to you. Coming to us live from Kyiv, right?
That's right. It's pretty late and cold out here. There are a lot of power outages lately, so it's chilly even inside, and it's been a crazy time here. We can talk about this now, or we can talk about it later.
No, go right into it. Yeah,
it's just kind of a wild situation in Kyiv right now, just because there was a Russian hack. I mean, Americans talk all the time about cybersecurity over and over and over again, but this war has led so many kind of modern military developments, the development of drone warfare. Now we're seeing cybersecurity being used, or the lack of cybersecurity or cyber attacks being used as a weapon of war in real time.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm in Kyiv. The Russians have hacked Kyivstar, which is the main or the top telecommunication provider in Ukraine. And that has left people basically blind. You think about how important internet and communications are to your daily life. And here in Ukraine, now we're ending day 2 without internet access for a lot of people who rely on Kyivstar for cell phone or home internet access. And there's real world safety effects to this, right? So when Russian planes launch or missiles launch, Ukraine also responds to try to keep its civilians safe by putting out this alert on apps that says, hey, there's an air alert. You got to seek shelter.
Yep.
Without internet, That doesn't happen.
Wow.
Here's where that kind of wells together in this terrible, terrible catastrophe. Just this morning, there were a number of attacks in Kyiv. So dozens of people were injured as a result of these attacks. And they weren't able to get, or many of them weren't able to get the alerts that they needed to seek shelter in an air raid, in a hardened structure, air raid shelter, because they didn't have the information they needed to respond to the attacks. I mean, this is what's going on. It's been kind of a wild 24 hours here in Kyiv.
Yeah, and so I appreciate you being able to join us. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to hear from you because I heard about this, and the thing about I enjoy about what you're so you've got the counteroffensive, which is terrific. I tell we'll post the link to it on the show here because it's just been terrific. You striking on your own and with the team to tell the stories, and something you said in a previous interview, and it kind of goes to what we're saying here is you wanted to tell a deeper story of the human side of this. And you just explained that there's a human side to the war. We hear a lot about, weapons transfers. We hear a lot about the latest press conferences from the president or troop movements or the counteroffensive itself. But as I read your stories, and I have been a subscriber for a while here, it's more of a depth of the human story. Your Christmas story of the mother who's waiting for her son, who's been a prisoner of war for 19 months, I think, is a great picture of what you're doing. What's driving you to seek that different kind of a journalism, and what is your goal with telling those stories and for Americans especially?
Well, a lot of people have pointed out this issue of, and you're seeing this in the U.S. Congress too, right? This issue of Ukraine fatigue, and it's easy to turn away for things that are presented in a boring manner, and so we were trying, when we launched the counteroffensive, which you can read at counteroffensive.news, we were trying to do a slightly different kind of journalism where we put the human stories first. So they're personality driven. They're really about taking a character who's going through the news rather than the news itself. So, for example, we don't talk about, there were, drone attacks in Kyiv overnight. We take you to the place where that happened and tell the story of the attack from the perspective, through the eyes of the person who actually experienced that.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to take a more holistic approach to what war correspondence really can be, and fight this idea of Ukraine fatigue by writing these compelling stories, these personal stories that would be interesting to people, regardless of whether they were set in Ukraine or anywhere else in the world. And, our goal is to really write these engaging stories about people who are threatened by authoritarianism. So we've started here. Our team is headquartered in Kyiv. We're launching, a Taiwan monthly supplemental issue starting next year. We're really trying to broaden and show people this is what it's like on the front lines of the battle for democracy all around the world, and make it more personal for people in the United States or Canada or the UK, where it feels sometimes like it's really far away. And when you cover the news, and the Ukraine war is like, today the front line moved from this village you've never heard of to another village you haven't ever heard of.
Yeah.
That's not personal or engaging, or it's not really going to grab your attention. But, as you mentioned, our most recent story is about this woman, Irina, who's talking in this incredibly moving way. We met her as she was marching, protesting, demonstrating for the return of her son, who's a prisoner of war he had been captured after the siege at Azovstal in Mariupol, at this famous siege where Ukrainian troops tried to hold out as long as they could, spent nearly 3 months surrounded by a much larger Russian force. So Irina is talking about what it's like to try to celebrate the holidays without her son. And it's just this story that tells you not only this particular story, but it tells you a lot about what families all across Ukraine are feeling right now. This is a story that's multiplied times 10,000, because that's how many Ukrainian prisoners of war are in Russian custody right now.
Right.
I mean, this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to take this micro, make it compelling, and tell you a little bit of what's happening in the macro, the bigger sense of things.
Yeah. And you touch on a little bit in that conversation that this battle against authoritarianism. And I heard you in that interview you did in May that you talked about something that really struck me. And I'd love to pull that thread with you. You said something about that empathy is the enemy of authoritarianism, essentially, right? That by presenting these human stories, it is a way to push back against authoritarianism, because authoritarianism dehumanizes, right? I mean, tell me more about how is that what drives you, and tell me more about your philosophy on that. I mean, I think it's a great philosophy, and it doesn't just apply to Ukraine and the battle against Russia, but it applies against our own political fights here in America.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is we're trying to fight against antipathy, right? And and it really all just kind of coalesces together. I mean, autocracy is about the rule of one, whether it's Putin, whether it's Bashar al-Assad, whether it's Xi Jinping. Autocracy is about one person making all the rules, making all the decisions, and individuals within those political systems who have to live under that repression being ignored. We're trying to reverse that. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to give some voice to someone who is suffering under the systems, because, you know, like you said, my philosophy is that empathy is the antidote to autocracy. That when you kind of highlight this individual suffering under an autocratic system, it demands a response from people who are reading, whether it's moral, whether it's financial, whether it's political, and kind of reaching out to your members of Congress. When you read these stories and you feel moved by them, and you understand the suffering that happens as a result of authoritarianism, it calls out for some sort of action in response. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to write these stories not just as, you know, some sort of medium for providing information or entertainment. It's really meant to try to compel or push folks to understand what's happening in these places that seem far away but have real impact on the future of the United States and the future of the West.
And that's key. And that argument's occurring here as we speak, as we record the show. Obviously, there's arguments about aid. You know, how are the Ukrainians viewing? I mean, it must be. I mean, obviously they're struggling. I mean, I think one of the articles you wrote recently, they said there's 50,000 amputees in the Ukraine, from the armed forces of Ukraine. We saw an article that said the Russians have lost like 3/4 of their military. You know, I mean, there's these huge loss in numbers. But by the same time, the Ukrainians can't do this alone. They do rely on aid. They don't have their own weapons industry. They've been at war for over a year and a half, going on 2 years. As they watch these political things unfold, what's the attitude of somebody knowing that the future of your nation rests in the hands of foreign politicians sometimes? Do you get feedback on that? Have you had those conversations with Ukrainians?
Yeah. I had one of my big fears in the medium to long term is this sense of betrayal and the sense of bitterness that's bubbling up among Ukrainians, that they thought the United States, that they thought Europe had their back, and they're feeling that they're teetering. I mean, there's this deep pessimism that coincided with winter kind of dropping in, the temperatures dropping, the darkness coming in earlier, and then just this acknowledgement that things aren't going very well on the front lines. And soldiers have been out there for nearly 2 years with very few breaks, fighting almost constantly. People are tired to the bone. And then you talk about everyone from, business owners to waiters and waitresses to people who have left the country and are waiting for a safe time to return. All of those people, as the war drags on, they're wondering, well, the United States helped us at the beginning, but it seems like they're kind of backing off. And, they spoke a good game about caring about democracy, and they spoke a good game about pushing back against authoritarianism. But we really need this help if we're going to continue the prosecution of this war and the protection of civilians, the protection of these cities from falling under Putin's thumb. Why is the United States dithering? Why are they, unable to unite and come together and approve support for a worthy cause? What I worry in the medium term is if the outcome for Ukraine is not good, despite all of the investment that the United States has put in and all the help that the United States has provided, the common thread among why Ukraine wasn't as successful as it could have been might ultimately be that they believe that the United States was at fault.
Yeah.
That the United States didn't step up, and that's a real danger. I mean, the United States has a key role as a leader for democracy all around the world. And its reputation rises and falls on whether it stands on difficult moments like this. And, Ukrainians are super pessimistic. They're very much down in the dumps at this moment. And I'm worried that the reputation of the United States is going to take a big hit here as well.
Yeah, and globally, I mean, there is a global arc to this. I've heard you talk about that. You wrote about that. You did a great piece I loved back in October about how to talk to your Republican uncle about Ukraine. And I can't think of an audience more that use that info than our audience. The Midas Touch audience and the non-democracy audience too. Is the keys of convincing our fellow Americans that the importance of this fight. I mean, what are some of the elements there? Pulling from your experience in Ukraine, and you've had conversations.
Yeah.
What are the elements that we need to know so that we can say to our neighbors and to our elected officials, this is a fight that matters?
Well, look, you'll remember that in the early months of the full-scale invasion, where Russia came in and Ukraine was able to resist in this very vibrant and honestly surprising way and push out invading Russian troops, that a lot of people were taking broad geopolitical conclusions from this. And that it wasn't just a message to Putin, it was also a message to all authoritarians around the world that the current situation is that people with weapons like javelins, with the means and the interest to resist will push back. And you better think twice before you lose a bunch of blood and treasure over silly acts of aggression. And that one of the dictators who this message ought to be heard by was Xi Jinping, and whether or not he was interested in launching some invasion of Taiwan over the next few years. Well, now as time goes on, and there might be another lesson learned, which is that the initial part might not be easy, but what Russia has determined and what Russia seems to be counting on as its strategy is that if they hang on long enough, they can outlast the West's resolve. That they can that even though the West has united around sanctions, they can kind of skirt those sanctions. And over time, if Ukraine isn't successful, and if Putin is allowed to have his way, then the opposite message actually might be sent to China, which is, okay, you're going to get some pushback at the beginning.
Yeah.
And it might be hard. Yeah. But if you stay, and if you as an authoritarian leader stay the course, people will just forget over the long term. They just don't care. And that is the real big picture challenge and the real big picture danger of what might happen here. It's not just about Ukraine. It's bad enough that with Ukraine, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are dying. Over 100,000 alleged war crimes have been committed in the last 18, 19 months. We're talking tons and tons of people in the millions who are trapped behind enemy lines in Russian-occupied territories. And you hear tons of stories from the abduction of children to sexual violence to torture of pro-democracy activists to civil society not being able to take part in any political decisions, on and on and on and on. So it's bad enough that there are these impacts in Ukraine. But what is going to happen is that this message is being sent to dictators and authoritarians around the world. Hey, it's okay in the long term.
Right. Just be patient.
If you're willing to weather the short-term thing, you'll get through it and you'll get what you want by force alone. And that's a terrible message for us to send in any century, let alone the 21st century.
Yeah. And there's a history of it. I mean, our 20-year war in Afghanistan ended up with the same people in charge. And so we are teaching our enemies the lesson of our impatience and our failure to be resilient in this case, that convenience is more important than strategy and suffering and the larger geopolitical issues. And it is ironic as hell that the same people that are complaining about China, who's now a partner with Russia on this, are willing to just walk away and let them essentially score a victory for cheap political points here in the United States. And on that note, one of the things we do struggle with here a lot is these myths and these lies about Ukraine and I think you've talked about it previously and you've written about it too, is, like the big lie about, well, everything's corrupt. I mean, if I have to hear one more person say, well, I think JD Vance, a U.S. senator, was on TV saying, why are we giving money to these guys so that his cabinet can buy bigger yachts? What is the truth? I mean, I obviously corruption has been a part of Ukraine's lives. How do we bust these myths? I mean, myths like that, which about corruption, otherwise.
Look, I've been basically in Ukraine in and out since the full-scale invasion began.
Yeah.
I have seen no yachts. I have seen no yachts. What I do see is on a daily basis, I see people scared and afraid. I see them terrorized by air alerts. I see them terrorized by drones buzzing around the city. You can hear them, when these Iranian-made Shahids drones buzz around the city. They've gotten this nickname that they're scooters because they sound like scooters. They're just buzzing around the city. And it's kind of a joke that people use to lighten the mood.
Yeah.
But imagine being a child growing up in this environment.
Yeah.
Where there are these deadly robots flying in the sky that could explode and kill you and your family.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see the yachts. I haven't observed any corruption here. Is there some level of corruption? I would expect so, but we haven't seen any reporting, any stories about any corruption affecting Western aid in substantial ways. So that's where the pushback would be. Fundamentally, the talk of corruption, well, corruption ought to be managed and there ought to be accountability for Western aid. I haven't seen anyone point to an example of where Western aid was corrupted, sold off, it was skimmed off or whatever else. I mean, I think that right. Ukrainians understand that they need to be responsible with this or they will lose it. And they realize that they're in the fight of their lives. So ultimately, the corruption talking point is kind of a distraction. I mean, right. There's no evidence behind it. It's a distraction made by people who wouldn't want to provide the aid anyways.
There you go.
And it's not made in good faith, I don't think.
Yeah, that's JD Vance in a nutshell, right? Most of these arguments are not in good faith. Most of these arguments are really domestic, political, willing to undermine the U.S. reputation internationally and our allies, and that there's real lives. And you talk about, and that's the stories you paint, the real life experiences of folks. You did a great story about the trucker sitting in the long line. They're now not only are we suffering, the U.S. is struggling, but even our partners like Poland and the EU are kind of pushing back, or here as well. Their backs are really against the wall. I mean, after all this time, how do the Ukrainians carry on? How do Ukrainian citizens get up each day and carry on as you said, they're literally turning their backs? I mean, has the issue at the Polish border been resolved? For those who don't know, there's a blockade at the Polish border where trucks are waiting in 5-mile long lines to get across the border. How do these Ukrainians get up at each day and face that with the worry, and what's the long-term danger or even the short-term danger for that happening?
Yeah, I mean, I what I'd want to do here is encourage your listeners and your viewers to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is just trying to live their lives. Let's say, for example, like one of the truckers we profiled has a newborn at home. Yeah. He is trying to earn enough to make ends meet. You get up and go on. You go on because there really is no alternative. Yeah. And so there's this kind of grim situation where people are, super pessimistic about the future and what the next few months will hold. There really is no alternative but to continue.
Yeah.
You're the people who are here are they're fighting for their idea, for the very idea that Ukraine ought to exist as an identity, that their families ought not to be slaughtered, that their democratic system ought to be maintained. Those things are things worth fighting, and Americans historically have agreed. These are the sorts of things that are worth fighting and dying for.
Right.
And worth continuing for, even when it looks grim, even when it looks difficult. And so, as you mentioned, we we profiled, one of these Ukrainian truckers. He's in a line right now that's 40 miles long.
Jesus.
He's been in he's been in line for 5 days. He's trying to bring some goods from Poland into Ukraine. Now this ultimately is kind of tariffs and cross-border issue, right? That Polish truckers are preventing Ukrainian trucks from crossing the border because they're worried that they're going to be undercut by cheaper Ukrainian labor. But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that authoritarians, in this case Putin, are just waiting and inciting, by the way, through things like informational warfare.
Yeah,
they're just waiting for Ukraine's closest allies to move on or to get used to the situation. Ukrainians don't have the luxury of getting used to the situation. Yeah. Poland had been one of the strongest backers of Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began. But now you're seeing these splinters start to pop up. The splintering of various groups. Truckers in Poland are starting to say, well, it was okay for these Ukrainians to do a little trucking inside the EU for a few months, during the full-scale invasion. But now I think we're going to protest and blockade them and make sure that they can't pass. I mean, this well of support is slowly running dry. And what we're trying to do is trying to tell some of these personal stories to show this is not just a border issue. This is not just a tariff issue. This has real effects on human beings who are suffering. And that has real effects for the fight for democracy.
Well, they're in here and globally as well. And there are lessons to pull from that. So it's been a pretty grim conversation. I mean, where do you find hope? I mean, I always try, one of my big themes in this show is I always try to get my guests and my listeners and viewers to understand that while there is tough, we have tough times ahead of us. It's hard to find optimism sometimes. You live there. I know Ukrainians are famously resilient people and proud. Where do you find hope in all of this, Tim? I mean, where is the moment for hope in all this? Is there, I guess is a better question.
The one thing I've been saying is you can still find sushi in Ukraine. A lot of people ask me, like, what's the most surprising thing about that you've learned in Ukraine? They think I'll probably talk about ATACMS missiles or air defenses or the trenches or javelin missiles, and I say a lot of people think that borscht is the Ukrainian national food. It's not. It's actually the Philadelphia roll.
I was not.
Ukrainians are obsessed with the Philadelphia roll. They put cream cheese on all of it. They put cream cheese on all of their raw fish. I'm not from Philadelphia. I don't even know if Philadelphia claims the Philadelphia roll, but it's a wild story. I've done some looking into this, and sushi became very, very popular around the Revolution of Dignity around 2014 as Ukrainians demanded democratic rights, as they demanded that their politicians recognize that Ukraine wants to be closer to Europe and further away from Russia. Yeah. And as part of that, the culinary choices changed too, because the Ukrainians look to Europe and they're like, what do these Europeans eat? And they're like, sushi and pizza. And so after 2014, there was this explosion in the popularity of sushi / pizza joints. Okay. Not separately. The restaurant would serve two things: sushi and pizza. And for some reason, cream cheese sushi became the most popular. I've had sushi near the front lines. I've been to places that have just been attacked by missiles or artillery. In eastern Ukraine, and across the street, you'll cross and there's a sushi place there. How the fish gets into Ukraine, a place that is nowhere near the ocean, I don't know. And I've asked sushi restaurateurs here in Ukraine, and they're like, it just comes by truck. I don't know where it comes from ultimately. And maybe as I'm eating it, I ought not to ask too much.
I was going to say, there's things I want to know the sourcing for,
but that's been one of those things. It's like, okay, there's resilience, but how do I illustrate the resilience? The way I illustrate that resilience and Ukrainians continuing to move forward is, look, you can go to the front lines and you can find sushi. That's my story on that.
It is the banality of it. You know, the best chicken I ever had was in the green zone, you know, in between rocket attacks in Iraq. You know, if you're, 2005, there was a little chicken stand that everybody knew, and we'd sneak over there and get a roasted, basically Iraqi rotisserie chicken. It's the banality of war, and you get used to it. I've heard you talk too about the explosion. I'll probably wrap on that point. Is life under wartime? You sort of get used to it. I remember sitting in Iraq. I spent my second and third tours in the green zone, and we were under attack from Sadr City. You get good at knowing what's inbound, what's outbound, and how far it's going. Like you can tell it's going to overshoot or go undershoot. I think that's life for you every day, right? You're listening to these explosions. The people are getting used to it.
Just this morning at 4:00 in the morning, there were a bunch of explosions. You could hear air defense, because the air defense that's outgoing to take out these missiles, they have a more hollower boom sound, right?
Right.
And versus the explosions that are much more kind of crispier. They're much more like they're much more movie like.
Yeah.
Like the explosions you'd imagine in the movies. And you can hear, I woke up at 4:00 in the morning this morning, and didn't get an air alert, right? Perhaps because of the internet outage. But I hear this. There are these explosions. There's chaos in my apartment. Of course, people are fumbling around. It's very, people are very concerned, and you just kind of get used to it. And you get up and you think, okay, I'm going to worry about this, or I'm just going to try to get a couple more hours of sleep here, because it didn't take us out.
Right.
So what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it?
I know it well.
We managed to get through that. Yeah.
I remember laying in bed.
The terrible reality of this is that like these awful acts of violence, they become, like you say, normalized, right? Dozens of people were injured today as a result of those attacks, more than 50 in Kyiv. And I'm not sure what the latest numbers are in terms of fatalities, but I mean, this happens all the time, and you can't help but wonder, is something terrible happening to my mind and I'm getting used to it?
Yeah, it's the banality. Like I said, I remember just laying in your cot, like the bunker's outside. It's early. Do I really want to get out of bed? That one's going long. And you come to a certain acceptance of your fate, I suppose it is. And well, I don't want to take more of your time. Tim, I really appreciate your perspective. I think the last thing I say, what would be your message as these? If you could send a message to our news, our political leaders and those in the White House and those in the Congress, what is your thoughts on as they argue this case right now, and which is literally occurring as we speak, of continued aid and the need for continued aid? What would be your message from Ukraine itself for those policymakers? If I could email it to them tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd say sit down and hash it out. I mean, the policymakers, by and large, the vast majority of lawmakers in the House and Senate, both parties, support Ukraine aid.
Right.
And they've brought in, Republican lawmakers have brought in this other totally unrelated issue on policy, on border policy, and smashed it into what should be, a near unanimous bill that would pass with resounding support from both parties in both houses.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on how to fix it, but ultimately, folks just need to sit down and hammer out a compromise that works, because fundamentally there are free people out here in Ukraine that are fighting every day in actual and shedding blood to defend their democracy, whereas American democracy is kind of dithering at home and taking an early holiday break, leaving for their Christmas recess and their New Year's recess. Well, people are literally dying out here waiting for their response. It's unacceptable.
I agree. Well, I will pass that message on to our next guest, as a matter of fact. So, Tim, man, it's so good to connect with you. It's been too long. It's good to see your face. It's good to see you still healthy and young compared to me. I was joking we were joking in the pre-show, folks, that I've grayed in the 10 years I've known Tim, and he has not. Which I think he was a child when I met him the first time.
I have quite a few more gray hairs.
I don't know, man. My entire beard is gray now. So I'm truly a gray beard now. So, the most important thing, Tim, thank you for everything you're doing. Thanks for your reporting. I'm an avid reader. More importantly, stay safe over there. I know it's a weird situation to be sitting there in the middle of a war zone. So I always tell people say, what was it like working with a journalist in combat? And I would say, a lot of the combat journalists I know saw more combat than I ever did. and that's no kidding true. You guys you've been there since the beginning. So most importantly, you and your colleagues stay safe. And thank you so much for informing us of what's going on.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. And if any folks who are listening or watching want to check us out, we're at counteroffensive.news.
You beat me to it. I was going to say, plug the Substack. So counteroffensive.news, you got to pay, folks. I don't often say this, but to support this, what Tim's done is a brave thing. He's struck on his own. He's building a news organization informing what's going on in the world at $8 a month, $8 a year. Counteroffensive.news. Totally worth it. Like I said, I'm a subscriber. It's worth it. They just did a Zoom. You did a Zoom with our friend Alex Vindman. Our first guest on of the year, and a dear friend of mine as well. And so it's really important what you're doing. So dear readers, dear followers, dear listeners, please go on over and subscribe to counteroffensive.news so they can keep doing this important work for all of us. So thank you, sir. Man, it's a fascinating conversation. And if you didn't catch it, we'll put it in the blurb of the show. The counteroffensive.news is terrific. Counteroffensive.news is terrific journalism, a very unique storytelling framework when they actually talk to individuals who are struggling in Ukraine or experiencing Ukraine. I cannot recommend it enough. And it was such a great conversation, I think, for giving you a picture. And I'm really excited about our next guest. Let's hear from our sponsors, and then we'll talk to Deputy National Spokesperson, National Security Council, Sean Savett. Heart health and staying healthy, especially when you have a family you want to spend time with, is so important. So important. So we could all benefit from heart healthy energy. Now, one of the best ways to get some, by supporting your blood pressure and circulation. SuperBeets Heart Chews are an easy and convenient way to support healthy blood pressure. They're plant-based and stimulant-free, so you get a green boost without the jitters of caffeine. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in SuperBeets are clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. SuperBeets Heart Chews are incredibly delicious and so much better than any alternative supplements out there. I take my SuperBeets Heart Chews each morning, and it's really kickstarted my morning routine. After taking my SuperBeets Heart Chews, I feel like I have more energy and I'm ready to take on the day. SuperBeets is the #1 doctor, pharmacist, and cardiologist recommended beet brand for cardiovascular health support. It's blood pressure support you can trust. SuperBeets Heart Chews support healthy circulations, so you not only get blood pressure support, you also get productive, heart-healthy energy without the crash. Now, double your potential with SuperBeets Heart Chews. Get a free 30-day supply of SuperBeets Heart Chews and 15% off your first order by going to getsuperbeets.com and using promo code FRED. That's getsuperbeets, BEETS.com, code FRED. Check out Human SuperBeets. You won't regret it. Someone told me there are science-backed ingredients that could help me feel 15 years younger in just a matter of months. I wouldn't have believed it. Well, then I tried Qualia Senolytics. As we age, everyone accumulates senescent cells in their body. Senescent cells cause symptoms of aging, such as aches and pains, slow workout recoveries, sluggish mental and physical energy that I know so well, all associated with that middle-aged feeling. Now, also known as zombie cells, they're old and worn out and serving a no useful function for your health anymore, but they're taking up space and nutrients from our healthy cells. Much like pruning the yellow and dead leaves and plants in my garden, Qualia Senolytic removes those worn out senescent cells to allow for the rest of them to thrive in your body. You take it just 2 days a month. The formula is non-GMO, vegan, as well as gluten-free, and the ingredients are meant to complement one another, factoring in the combined effect of all the ingredients together. But best of all, on top of all that, you have a 100-day money-back guarantee. And since taking Qualia Senolytics, I have had higher energy levels. I feel 15 years younger, more productive, enthusiastic in life. Not to mention, importantly for me, less aches and pains. Now, resist aging at the cellular level. Try Qualia Senolytic. Go to neurohacker.com/Fred for up to $100 off, and then use code FRED at checkout for an additional 15% off. That's neurohacker.com/Fred for an extra 15% off of your purchase. And man, thanks Neurohacker for sponsoring our show. Man, it's great to be back. My next guest, I'm so excited to have join us. You know, we were just in Ukraine talking to Tim Mack about the life on the ground there. And I really wanted to bring in the perspective of here in DC. As you know, President Zelensky came to visit this week. So I got no better, I couldn't ask for a better guest. Thank you, the White House. Sean Savett is the deputy spokesperson for the National Security Council. Sean, thanks so much for joining us today to give us this new perspective.
Thank you for having me, Fred. It's good to be on the show.
Yeah, so let's start there. You know, President Zelensky was right here in the White House this week. He met with the president, he met with Congress. You know, where do we stand in our ability to continue assisting Ukraine at this moment as we speak?
So it's we're at a critical juncture right now, and at a critical moment, we need Congress to take action. That's simply where we stand right now. That we have enough resources left for 1 or 2 more aid packages in this month for Ukraine to meet their urgent battlefield needs. Obviously, your listeners and your viewers just heard from Tim just how critical the needs are on the ground right now.
Yeah.
And then after that, we're gonna be in a seriously tough situation. We need Congress to act. The president put forward this national security supplemental request, back in August for the first time, because and then again in October, because we saw what was happening on the battlefield. We wanted to make sure that we didn't run out of resources to support Ukraine, and here we are, where Congress has not acted yet. And if anything, we're hearing right now that House Republicans are preparing to go out of town and go home for the holidays for a 3-week break, and that would just send a terrible message to Ukraine. It would send a terrible message to our allies, to countries around the world, when we need resources to ensure that Ukraine's urgent battlefield needs are met, and that there is not going to be any interruption to the critical flow of American supplies.
And what's in the current package that is before Congress? I believe it's $60 million, if I'm correct.
Yes, yeah. So what we've asked for is funding authorities to allow us to continue to take weapons and equipment that are in U.S. military stocks around the world, and then to send them to Ukraine, and to then go out and buy new weapons and equipment to replace what we're sending to Ukraine, which creates jobs, restarts production lines around this country. That there's a bit of a misconception out there that the funding that Congress has approved for Ukraine is just money that we're sending over to Ukraine, and you know, they'll just use that to try to defend themselves. And what actually is the case is that Congress approves specific funding authorities that the U.S. Army, the Navy, other branches can then go. The combatant commands can then go and say, okay, well, we can now afford to remove X or remove Y from our own stocks. We can send those artillery ammunition rounds, right, the HIMARS, the javelins, whatever we have in stocks right now. Those air defense assets. We can send that over to Ukraine. They can then use that on the battlefield to defend themselves against Russian soldiers, to protect their cities from aerial barrages from Russian forces. And then the military gets to go and buy a bunch of new stuff that's even better, and that creates jobs and supports jobs around the country. And so post-Cold War, and really as we wound down from Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of production lines, as you know, Fred, have been shut down or stagnated. The U.S. military has been ordering less and less stuff, and that overall hurts our military readiness. And so what we've done to support Ukraine has actually significantly improved our military readiness, because all of a sudden we're giving the combatant commands a bunch of new shit, forgive my language, that's newer, that's supporting American jobs, and that replaces what we're giving to Ukraine. So it's a win-win. Yeah. But unfortunately, at the end of this month, we're going to lose what's called replenishment authority. That's the technical term for what Congress approves that allows the military to go buy weapons and equipment to replace what we're giving Ukraine. And so we'll be at this critical point now where we can't replace anything else that we're giving. We have dwindling resources to give Ukraine more, and it'll be an entirely political, self-inflicted problem, because we've now jump-started these production lines, so we don't have a capacity issue. Right. We are still producing a bunch of weapons, equipment, artillery ammunition, rounds that that Ukrainian forces could be using every single day to fire at any Russian forces who are going on the offensive. We're still producing more interceptors for Patriot missiles and things like that to shoot down Russian missiles and protect cities, but we all of a sudden won't have the ability or the authority to actually give it to Ukraine, and it'll just sit in U.S. stocks. And that's just a weird juncture to be in right now. So that's why we need Congress to act. And quite simply, we need House Republicans not to pick up and get out of town at the end of this week, because that's the current plan right now. They're going home for the holidays. And that would just send a terrible message, both to Ukraine, but also to Putin.
Yeah.
We've seen Russian state TV this week highlighting and cheerleading what congressional Republicans are doing. They've been talking on Russian TV about how it's great that that Congress is blocking funding right now, egging congressional Republicans on. And we saw the spokesperson for the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin's press secretary, say yesterday that they're watching very closely what happens in Congress this week. So our message to Congress is Russia's watching, so is Ukraine, so is the rest of the world. Pass this funding right now and make sure that we can continue to stand with Ukraine in their time of need.
And let's pull that thread a little bit too about where this stuff goes. The aid packages, there's so much mythology and misinformation and disinformation. I saw ridiculous disinformation from Lauren Witzke today, who's a former Senate candidate, is just a nut job, basically saying that Zelensky bought a big house in Florida with our money, basically. We're not you're going to laugh. I served in Iraq in the early days of the war, and we literally did ship over pallets of cash. I distributed it. We're not doing that. We for those who don't know the history in Iraq, the early days, we were literally giving money out. And I remember I was up in Mosul airport, and my commander goes, "Hey, you got to come see this." And we go over, and there's a no kidding pallet this high of cash. This is not that case, right? We're not doing that this time, are we?
Happening right now. The opposite, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Fred, but the exact opposite, so your listeners can understand the comparison with then and now. Yeah. But when we give economic aid and budget aid to of Ukraine, it's not a pallet of cash. What actually is it goes through a fund distributed by the World Bank. Okay. And there are two companies that are doing auditing. There's Deloitte, and there's another accounting firm as well that then audits Deloitte, which audits the World Bank, to make sure that there's built-in oversight. And the government of Ukraine, when they're going to use this budget aid and this economic aid that they get from the U.S. or other allies, they have to submit verified expense receipts of what they're actually doing. So we know that they are using this funding to go pay those first responders when there's a missile attack that hits an apartment building. The people who are on the scene, if they're government first responders, that's where our budget aid is going. And we know that the soldiers, when they get paychecks, that's where that aid is going. It's those paychecks, because we see the receipts that we're getting. And I know that giving economic aid may not be as popular as sending a weapon. And, it's a lot more concrete to say, look at this javelin that just took out a Russian tank. It's pretty cool. But the reality is that Ukraine's military expenditures exceed more than 100% of their budget right now. Wow. And so they actually will not have the money and the resources to pay their soldiers on the front lines in these tough conditions if we don't continue to provide economic aid in other countries as well. So that's a big part of what this Ukraine funding package is as well.
And it's
not the pallets of cash.
Yeah, it's not pallets of cash. And most of the money, as you mentioned earlier, essentially is staying right in the United States. It is going to U.S. defense manufacturers. Yep. It is going to purchase U.S. actual equipment, and it's never actually touching Ukrainian hands in any way, is it?
Right. Right, exactly right. I believe the figure is more than 60% of the overall supplemental funding that Congress has approved since the beginning of this war, in response to Putin's invasion, has gone to buying new weapons and equipment in Ukraine. So that money is going to, or for Ukraine rather, so that money is going to U.S. defense contractors. It's going into the pockets of American workers who are producing this equipment, or it's going to DoD operations, as you may recall, when Putin invaded Ukraine, and a lot of our NATO allies were on alert, and Putin's had signaled that many NATO, some of NATO's eastern flank countries could be next. We plussed up. We increased our force posture. We sent more troops to Poland and to other countries on NATO's eastern flank, because especially after the previous administration, we wanted to send a message that we stand with our NATO allies, that our support is ironclad, and as President Biden says, that we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Yeah. That was a very important message for the president to send in this time of uncertainty. And it was also important because he is so committed to our allies and partners, because he fundamentally recognizes that when our alliances are strong and our partnerships are strong, that helps Americans' interests, it helps American security. And when another country is nervous, when an ally is nervous, you need to to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And so we've had more American troops in Eastern Europe, in NATO allies. Now, I'll be clear, in NATO territory,
right,
not in Ukraine. There are no U.S. forces, despite the misinformation that's out there. There are no U.S. forces that are in Ukraine fighting Russia. There are U.S. forces in Poland, Germany, and NATO allies stationed there as a deterrent to Vladimir Putin, lest he think about attacking NATO territory. But that is that's where a lot of this funding is going. It's not all going to Ukraine.
That great. And so we did get the announcement when Mr. Zelensky was here that I know Secretary Austin and President Zelensky met, and we announced that we were doing a couple $100 million, I believe, dollars worth of under Presidential Drawdown Authority, PDA. Explain that. I mean, because we're being told we're running out of money, but there is some money left in our current aid packages and using this presidential authority. Can you explain that a little bit to our viewers so they understand when they see this? Like, it's I think sometimes it confuses people who are watching all this. Like, on one hand, we're saying there's no money, we can't help. And on the other hand, we're now saying, congratulations, here's some more Patriots. Can you walk through what the PDA means and not public display of affection, I guess, but what does the PDA mean and what do we just do?
Right. When you say PDA around here, it means a very different thing than
West Point, where I went to college.
Exactly.
It's against regulations at West Point.
Right. Here, it's a Presidential Drawdown Authority, which is the authority, as I said earlier, that allows the U.S. military to take weapons, equipments out of our stocks and to send it to Ukraine. Okay. And so the aid package that the president announced yesterday, when he was sitting alongside President Zelensky in the Oval Office, was drawn from previous funding that Congress had approved. So I believe it was last September, Congress approved significant amount of PDA authority. The exact numbers escape me at the moment, but it was a significant amount. Yeah. And what we have done is we have, every couple of weeks, we have drawn from those funding authorities to give Ukraine a new aid package. And the reason we do that every 2 to 3 weeks is because different battlefield needs arise. We want to make sure that we have the flexibility to respond to any developments. So when Russia launches a new offensive, we can quickly resupply those Ukrainian forces. When Ukraine tells us, well, their air defenses are running low around Kyiv, or all of a sudden Russia is doing something new, like targeting Odessa and the ports in Ukraine, as they did this summer when they withdrew from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and all of a sudden there's a new urgent need there for air defenses. We have those resources available to give to Ukraine, and so we've been doing these aid packages consistently every 2 weeks or so for the last 2 years, and we are now running at the very end of that bucket. So we've nearly scraped it dry. There's enough for about 1, maybe 2 more packages this month before we'll run out of the ability to do more without replacing our own stocks. So we're I guess there's 2 buckets, if I'm going to be very precise. There's the PDA bucket right here, which is and then there's the replenishment bucket I talked about earlier, which is you send from one, you can immediately replace from the other. We will be out of the replenishment bucket by the end of this month, and we will have just a tiny bit of PDA remaining, but we won't be able to replace what we give. And so all of a sudden we're hurting our military readiness, and we just don't want to be in that position. So that's the technical term. Yeah.
Because we are sending M1s now. We are sending Bradleys, which I know are saving. From Tim's reporting, we know Bradley fighting vehicles are saving lives. He did a pretty good story about, if you saw it, he did a story about Bradley fighting vehicles making such a difference in the battlefield. So it's remarkable. But you're right. We have a limited number.
They're being produced in Pennsylvania. They're being produced in countries around that. As President Biden said, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Fred. When President Biden did that Oval Office address about a month and a half ago, he talked about how American workers are producing this equipment that's going to the fight for freedom in Ukraine. Right. And that's something that Americans should be proud of. But we also want to make sure that those American workers can continue to have funding from the Defense Department to produce those Bradleys, as it goes into Tim's reporting.
Well, the lesson learned, too, is, there's lessons for the United States military. We're using, look, I'm an old soldier, so none of us saw this much artillery rounds going downrange. I think in modern warfare, there was an assumption, but the burn rate of ammunition in this war has been staggering. Staggering in historical terms. I don't think we've seen this kind of burn rate for artillery ammunition and anti-tank missiles probably Korea, or certainly not even Vietnam. So there is been value, if you will, in us restarting these ammunition plants. We had let these plants languish. There's been a lot of defense consolidation. I think when I retired from the military, there was 20 defense manufacturers. Or when the war started, I guess I should say 2000, there were like 21 defense manufacturers. Now there's like 6. And so there is value that we're getting these restarted, and there's a long-term goal, because our defense is going to rely on the lessons we're learning from this war as well. I believe, don't you? I think that's the way you see it too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's the strategic lessons,
right,
that American military officials and planners will learn, and the tactical lessons. And then there's the lessons about making sure that you're well stocked and well supplied, and you see what works and what doesn't. And restarting those production lines, both here in America and in Europe, has been really important. I think the world woke up and realized all of a sudden we're watching the biggest land war in Europe since World War II, that has this huge drain on artillery, as you said. And Russia has significantly ramped up its production. I mean, they've gone full wartime economy, and shifted resources away from a lot of other things to ramp up their own production, because it's this need. And then we've been trying to do the same through the money that Congress has authorized. We've been urging our European allies and partners to be doing the same, and they are. But that kind of ramp up, it takes time, and it also is important to sustain it. And that's why you don't want to cut congressional funding all of a sudden once you do bring all those jobs back and do put all those people back to work, because all of a sudden we're seeing that there are conflicts that need these kind of ammunition and equipment, unfortunately.
I think I've taken a lot of time. The one thing I do want to come out on is, what's the impact if Congress doesn't pass? I mean, even in the delay, I feel like we're sending a clear message, not just to our Ukrainian allies, but we're sending messages to Russia. We're sending messages to China. I mean, what does the White House see as the real danger, not just for Ukraine, but for our global position, if we fail to support Ukraine at this point?
A really good question, and it's a really important message. There's the impact first to Ukraine, where all of a sudden, if you don't have artillery ammunition going to Ukraine every 2 weeks, we can see Russian soldiers taking over trenches, overrunning Ukrainian lines. Ukraine has had a lot of success. They've shocked the world, I think, going back to what everyone's expectations were in February 2022. Yeah. Ukraine has retaken more than 50% of the territory that Russia took in its initial invasion. Wow. And that's all of a sudden at risk if we don't pass more funding. But taking a step broader than Ukraine, all of a sudden, for the moment, you have an emboldened Putin who thinks, well, the West's support crumbled. They didn't do anything to stop us from taking over Ukraine. What country should I try to invade next? President Biden's line from history is that we know that dictators don't stop if they just keep going. We know this from common sense too, that if you don't stand up to bullies, they're just going to keep going, and you have to do that. But then you also have to look at the impacts around the rest of the world, among our allies who trust American credibility, who we have so many treaty alliances around the world. We have strong partnerships with countries, and we want them to know that American credibility means something, that when we say we will come to your defense, we will be there to support you in your time of need, that we will help you if you're experiencing a challenge. If we want you to reorient yourselves towards a more pro-American, pro-Western approach as opposed to a pro-Russian or another approach. We want them to know that we are there to support them. But alternatively, you also have to look at what would be aggressors and adversaries would take away from that. What lessons will other countries around the world and other regions around the world who are watching the strength of U.S. support for Ukraine take from this if congressional Republicans fail to stand with Ukraine and yank away our support?
Yeah, it does send a loud and clear message that we don't want broadcast. And look, that is the danger. I think it's always been the danger in the West. Tim and I did talk about it earlier, where that these enemies, these authoritarians, know they can wait us out, and if we give in to exhaustion or give in to it's just taking too darn long, they do win. I mean, and the message will be very clear. Whereas the fight that stopped them, and that initial fight may have given our other enemies pause. China's probably watching, like, oh, wait a minute, it's not going to be an easy win. But then the second message is if we give in after 2 years, and they're going to say, oh, okay, well, we may not win initially, but they'll quit. It's a very, very dangerous message to be sending to the world about the United States and what we stand for.
Very much so, especially in the Indo-Pacific, where we certainly don't want to see the stability of that disrupted right now. You talk to other countries in Europe, but you could say that for every continent around the world. I mean, the hallmark of the 21st century and this international order that we've built is that we're not going to allow, or that countries should not be allowed to try to conquer or carve up their neighbor's territory just for conquest. And that is something that we saw for centuries in history. We saw countries and empires, invade each other, conquer each other, a lot of death and violence and war. And that was something that coming out of World War II, the United States was at the lead of trying to set up an international order to prevent that from ever happening again. And by and large, we've succeeded in that up until now. And that's what's at stake right now, that it's not just the freedom and the independence of the people of Ukraine. And it's not just whether or not we're going to support the people who've been subject to war crimes, to crimes against humanity, to absolute brutality from Kremlin-backed and Russian forces, but it's also about whether or not we're going to stand up for these principles in history, and that history will judge the United States, in particular congressional Republicans, if they do not continue to stand with the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about the Israel situation. I mean, there's so much going on, right? And for them to simply walk away and go home at this moment,
Right.
This crisis moment in America,
Right.
for America and for our global allies, it's just such a terrible precedent. And even as they pursue, which you won't discuss because this ridiculous impeachment stuff today and this week, it's just completely ludicrous what's happened in the Congress.
Yeah.
So, well, Sean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining us and taking time. I know you're a busy man right now. Obviously, there's going on in the world. I think my viewers really appreciate understanding better what's going on and keep up the fight, brother.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show, and hope to do it again soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks. Wow. Okay. What a great conversation, right? Sean is terrific. He knows those numbers. He knows the policy. Really, really super informative, really more informative than I even hoped for. So I think you see it now, right? You see the connection between what's happening on the ground in Ukraine and what's happening in D.C. and the danger we face both actual with national security, the danger for us and for our allies, but the global danger with the political manipulations that are happening in Washington, D.C. with the Republicans. I hope you're armed with information that can help you, like understanding what a PDA means and understanding what is the situation we face as a nation and why we must continue to say it. Obviously, I take a very strong position in Ukraine. We must help Ukraine. There's just no way around this. We have an international duty. We have a national security duty for the United States. We can't say we're worried about Iran, we're worried about China, we're worried about other despots and authoritarians, and then allow Putin to do his will upon the people of Ukraine, commit war crimes, to take over territory illegally. So there just isn't a way out of this. I mean, I wish I could say, oh yeah, we can half-ass it. We can't half-ass it. You can't half-ass murder. You can't half-ass the slaughter that's going on, and there's just no way to ignore that. So with all that, I hope you enjoy the show. I'm going to drag this out. As always, you can find us on Substack at fpwellman.substack.com. I'd love you to join that community. You'll find more information about the show and some stuff going on. You can always find me at fpwellman I'm still on X a little bit for now, I hope. I don't know. We'll see. It's getting bad. But definitely on Threads. I love Threads. FPWellman Official on Threads. FPWellman Official on Instagram. As always, follow the show on Democracy Pod and our own YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, if you're a regular Midas Touch viewer, I would love you to do that. We're going to be putting a lot more content on there. We got a pretty good plan for the new year with new content for the On Democracy channel. You'll be seeing some interesting stuff you might not see on the Midas Touch channel. So if you got time, slide on over to On Democracy Podcast on YouTube and subscribe there. It's for free, of course, and you'll get the show a little early. I sneak it out early to our subscribers. So be sure to do that. With that, have a wonderful week. We're getting close to the holidays. I hope you're getting ready. I'll be spending some time with my family and myself. But in the meantime, stay safe out there. Keep up the fight for our democracy, and we'll see you next week.